a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the book is basically the culmination of all my experiences up until this point. It started out as just a guidebook that I used to help veterans deal with trauma and overcome the experiences they've had in war. And so I take guys with my nonprofit to Mexico, and in 2 days we build a home for a homeless family. Yeah. And I use this book as a guide to help them learn all the lessons that I've learned over the last 10 years. Right. And through the process of doing this, God showed me that there was that I could help a lot more people than just veterans with this book. That trauma is trauma. Yeah. No matter how you experienced it, all your traumas might be different, but the results are always the same. Totally. The depression, the anxiety, the suicidal ideations, the drug abuse and alcohol, it all has the same result. And so I've learned over the last few years that this doesn't just help veterans, but it can help the general public as well. So we decided to publish the book to see if we can help even more people, even outside the veteran community.
That's amazing. And I know there's been a lot of studies. I track, what the St. John Hopkins Institute Research Facility is doing and all kinds of other stuff that's really driven towards how people deal with trauma and PTSD. And that has been a lot of the results lately coming out is trauma's trauma. It doesn't matter if it's DV related or combat related or they were robbed in a Walmart parking lot. They're seeing, when you really look at the MRI map of what's going on in that space, they're actually more similar than people think. And I think the general populace thinks, well, PTSD from combat is its own category. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's, there are some unique factors that come with that for sure. But man, there's just been so much that's happening in that space, and so I'm really happy to see you kind of expand. I know you've helped so many vets, and I know there's so many more people that can help from that. Before we dive too deep into this, though, I'd love to hear your origin story. Where were you born? How'd you grow up? What kind of kid were you? I want to know the real nuts and bolts of what brought you to this point right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in the mountains of Northern California.
Nice.
In a small little mountain town on Highway 36 called Mad River.
Nice.
And it's right on the Humboldt-Trinity County line. So I know some of you guys, your ears are perking up right now.
Ooh, Humboldt.
Yeah, Humboldt County, right? Like that's where all the marijuana originated from here on the West Coast. And so it's absolutely true. I grew up, my parents were marijuana farmers. And that was back when it was in the Wild West.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've literally watched that industry go from the Wild West to Main Street.
Right.
And I've experienced that firsthand. So it's been really unique perspective for me watching that whole thing happen.
It's a whole different world.
It's a whole different world. And so when I grew up on in this little tiny community, I think the graduating class for 1997 was 8 students. Okay, so really small town.
Yeah.
When I grew up out there, so there's the town of Mad River, and then there's what they call the Green Gate. And then past the Green Gate is called 8 Mile.
Nice.
And it's 8 miles from the Green Gate to the end of the world. Like there's nothing else out there but wilderness. Yep. And so that's where this community of marijuana farmers lived, was past the Green Gate.
Right.
And had a big lock on it. Nobody went past the Green Gate unless you lived past there. The sheriff wouldn't even go back there. It's a true story. I mean, he would just hang a note on the gate that said, come see me when you come out.
We need to chat. Yeah.
That's how I grew up, was in the Wild West, really. I saw some crazy things as a kid.
I can imagine. Well, and in the 90s too, I mean, what a time to be alive in the first place, right?
Right. And I learned, there was a lot of loggers there, and then there's very few of the kind of hippie, pot farmers that were there. Right. That was not a good mix. And so going to school was tough because you had these, redneck logger kids that would always pick on you. And
totally.
I had long hair because that's what everybody did where I lived. So I get picked on a lot, and I learned how to fight really quickly. Yeah. And so that transitioned me into the military, being able to, I had that history of being a smaller guy.
Yeah.
And
taking the fight.
That's right. When I would join the Marines, I was 120 pounds.
Ooh.
And so I didn't notice at the time, but, people look at me like, what are you doing here?
Right.
So, but I grew up really tough, and in the military, it's a lot about hardship and being able to adapt and overcome hardship.
So true.
How I grew up was a hardship. I didn't have running water in my house or power. We lived in a little cabin that my dad had built. We had a wood stove, and that was our main source of heat, and we would cook on that.
Yeah.
To get water in, we had a spring that we dug out, and we piped that into the house. Dang. Just one 1-inch black hose. We'd fill up a bathtub, heat that water on the stove, or the wood stove, and then that's how we would take a bath. I mean, so we would hunt for our food, canned foods, you know, because when we get snowed in the winter, I mean, you were there, and you weren't getting out for months.
That's right.
So I grew up like that. So going in the military wasn't as hard of a transition for me as it was for some of the other guys who grew up in the city.
Part of the process.
Yeah, they hadn't experienced that. So
100%.
I did very well in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't as much of a hardship as it was for some of the other guys because where I had come from was so much more difficult to survive than the military. I'm like, I got a warm bed and a blanket, and they feed me 3 times a day. Like, what are you complaining about?
At me,
Yeah,
it's easy. It's so funny to talk about that though, because I remember my experiences through basic training, and you could tell within the first 10 seconds who had never even thought about the military before, and they've been coddled a little bit. I don't want to call them snowflakes, but these guys are coming in and they're losing their mind because somebody's in their face yelling at them, telling them they did something wrong or they're not performing right, and they're, oh my God, I'm having to do push-ups. You could tell that they were just losing their mind. And then there were other guys who did have that kind of experience in some way, whether they were a military brat or they had been in some kind of junior ROTC or they had some kind of prep. But I'm so bullish on this mentality that adversity is what causes success and really launches you into a whole, it just prepares you. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. I'm of the same mindset.
Yeah.
And so I tell people that, because I work in ministry a lot. I'm very involved in my church.
Sure.
And so people will come in who are new believers who are like, I want to serve somewhere. I don't know what God's calling me to. I said, well, look for your pain, and there your ministry will be also. Because who better to lead somebody through that experience?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
And
I've got that T-shirt. Follow me. Absolutely.
So many people shy away from things that have caused them pain in the past.
So true.
And if they would just face those fears and overcome those fears, then they can lead the next person through it as well.
Yeah.
And so that's all I do. With my program with Q Missions, we've won multiple awards.
Right.
I don't have a college degree. I'm not some psychologist. I just show people the path that I've taken, and had success. And I say, hey, avoid these things because these are pitfalls.
Right.
And guys who've had great success just doing what I've done, it's not some grand program that was in this think tank that they created, with all these guys with PhDs and things like that. That's not what's helping guys.
Formulated on the ground.
That's right.
This is what's real. And we talk about it in the military all the time. How many times did you get orders while you were in a combat situation from somebody who wasn't even close? They weren't even probably in that country giving you orders. And then when you call back to say, hey, this doesn't make sense, there's nobody on the other line.
That's right.
Execute without question. And it's like, boots on the ground. I'm looking at the situation. This doesn't make sense. That frustrated the crap out of me.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of pouring back into the community.
Absolutely.
And it's the basis of my program and the basis of the book that I wrote, which is healing through service. There's healing through serving other people, and that's what God showed me. And I spent 7 years on the mission field, never thinking that I'd be doing anything like this.
Yeah.
Just I went to Mexico the first time. I built a house for a homeless family.
Yeah.
And something really changed inside of my heart, and I was like, wow, this is different. And then I need more of this. So I went back to my church. I said, where else are you going? What else are you doing? And they got me connected with the missions director. And I spent 7 years traveling all over the world. I've been to Haiti, Honduras, South Africa, Cape Town, Swaziland, Kenya, Malawi, the Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And I'm building churches and schools and orphanages. I'm digging wells. I'm teaching. I'm pouring into the community. Yeah. But it's healing me. There's healing in that. And so that's just a program I developed for myself, never intending to lead anybody else and not wanting to either.
Yeah, right.
When God called me to do it, I said, no, I'm not interested in this. This is not for me. And I was really disobedient in that for a few months. Yeah. And a good friend of mine, Jason Royer, I served in Anglica with him. Yeah. He went off the grid. Mm. And I remember thinking, man, I said, all right, God, his death doesn't have to be the catalyst for me to start leading other veterans through this program. I'll do it regardless. But I didn't have the money. Yeah. It cost me about $20,000 to take a team of 15 guys down through this program. And I didn't have the money. But I had a really nice fishing boat. Yeah. So I sold my fishing boat to pay for that first trip. Yeah. 3 days later, they found Jason. He had checked himself into a VA hospital, inpatient treatment. Wow. And so I couldn't turn back then, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're locked in now.
So I continued with the sale of the boat, and I led my first team down there on Veterans Day of that year, and it's 4 years ago. And man, never looked back. I watched those guys go through that program, and I watched the healing. And there's a great video on YouTube that you can watch that shows that very first trip and taking those guys through, and you can see the pain and the anguish on their face and in their voice. And you can watch that just melt away as they go through this process. And I was like, okay.
It's amazing.
And then that's what started the first edition of the book, which was just a small little guidebook for these guys to teach them to go through the process. And that's evolved into the book that's going to be published here in the spring, which is Healing Through Service. And that is even more of an evolution because it's written to the military and to veterans, but I rewrote it in a way that it applies to everybody. So anybody could pick up this book and gain some knowledge out of it. Anybody can pick it up and learn this process of healing through service to help them overcome the trauma they've experienced. Because we've all experienced trauma.
Oh, yeah.
You know, one of my favorite lines, and it's been overused a million times, but I'm going to use it again anyway. Yeah. It's from Black Hawk Down.
Nice.
You know, and the Master Sergeant, he's there, and they're going through the convoy, and they're getting all shot up.
Yep.
And they halt the convoy, and he gets out, and he goes to the lead vehicle to find out what's going on.
Yeah.
Why are we stopped? And sees that the driver was hit. So they pull him out and put him in the back. And he tells the A driver, like, hey, you need to start driving.
Yep.
It's like, well, I'm shot. And the Master Sergeant says, well, we're all shot. Get in there and drive. And so that's us. That applies to everybody in this world. We've all experienced some sort of hurt and pain and trauma. But if we stay there, we lose. And we know that in a firefight, right? Like if we're getting hit and we're getting pinned down,
we're not coming back.
You've got to move. If you stay pinned down, you're done.
Yeah.
You've got to move. You've got to move forward. You've got to advance.